Welcome to NoxVox. Settle in for tonight's sleep story. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you are joining us from tonight. Let us know in the comments below. Now, let's begin. The year was 1938. The world teetered on the brink of a war that would swallow continents, yet Dr. Elias Hawthorne cared little for the noise of nations. He cared for the quiet places where history had been buried and forgotten. Places that still whispered if you knew how to listen. Elias stood on the creaking balcony of a faded apartment in old Cairo, the evening call to prayer drifting across the rooftops like a lullaby. His fedora rested on the railing, its brim frayed from years of desert winds and jungle rains. At 42, his shoulders were still broad, but his movements had grown more deliberate, more patient. The reckless fire of youth had mellowed into something steadier, a deep, quiet hunger for discovery rather than glory. He lit a cigarette and watched the Nile turn golden in the dying light. That was when the knock came. It was soft, almost hesitant. Elias's hand instinctively brushed the coiled bullwhip hanging beside the door. He opened it slowly. An elderly Ethiopian man in a dusty galabeah stood in the hallway, face half hidden by a worn turban. In his wrinkled hands, he held a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Dr. Hawthorne," the old man whispered in accented English. "The serpent has stirred. It calls for the one who still believes." He pressed the bundle into Elias's hands. "Only you can walk the path without being consumed." Before Elias could ask a single question, the stranger melted back into the shadows of the narrow street and was gone. Elias locked the door, cleared the wooden table, and unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay a heavy clay tablet covered in ancient GEZ script. He lit the kerosene lamp and leaned close. The carving showed a great serpent devouring its own tail, the Ouroboros. At the center floated a black crystal that seemed to absorb the lamplight itself. Below the images, the words were carved deep: "The shadow of the eternal serpent sleeps beneath the veil of Axum. 7 shards. 1 whole. He who assembles them may command time, or finally rest within it. Seek the one who walks between worlds." Elias sat back, heart beating slow and steady. He had heard fragments of this legend years ago in a smoky tavern in Addis Ababa. Scholars dismissed it as a myth. But Elias had learned long ago that myths were simply history that hadn't finished speaking yet. He poured himself 2 fingers of warm whiskey, sipped it slowly, and made his decision in the quiet way he always did, not with excitement, but with acceptance. The road was calling again. By the time the first light of dawn touched the minarets, his satchel was packed: spare shirt, notebook, revolver with 2 boxes of ammunition, his father's old compass that never pointed north, a length of rope, and the bullwhip that had saved his life more times than he could count. He left a short note for the university and slipped out into the waking streets. The journey to Ethiopia was long and gentle, the kind of travel that already began to soften the edges of his thoughts. 12 days passed like a slow dream. First by crowded train across the Egyptian desert, then by camel caravan through the burning Danakil Depression, where the ground cracked like old leather and the air shimmered with heat. The caravan leader, an old man named Tesfaye, rode beside him in silence for many hours. On the 10th night, under a sky so full of stars it felt like a second ocean above them, Tesfaye finally spoke. "You seek the serpent, Effendi." "I seek answers," Elias replied softly. Tesfaye nodded. "Some answers are heavier than gold. Some are lighter than sleep." On the 14th night, they reached the remote highlands. The camels were left behind. Elias continued alone on foot, following an almost invisible trail through thick jungle that smelled of wet leaves and distant rain. The ruins appeared without warning. Massive obelisks rose from the green like the fingers of sleeping giants. Vines thick as a man's thigh draped over carved serpent heads. In the center of the clearing stood the collapsed temple, its entrance framed by 2 colossal stone serpents whose eyes, though eroded, seemed to watch him with ancient patience. Elias lit a torch. The flame cast long, dancing shadows. He took a slow breath, adjusted his fedora, and stepped inside. The air changed instantly, cooler, heavier, almost welcoming. His boots made almost no sound on the moss-covered stones. He moved carefully, testing each flagstone before committing his weight. The temple felt alive, breathing in time with him. A soft click beneath his left boot. He dropped instantly. A volley of ancient darts hissed through the air where his chest had been a moment earlier. Elias smiled in the darkness, not a triumphant smile, but the quiet smile of an old friend recognizing an old game. "Still testing me," he whispered. Deeper he went. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber lit by glowing blue fungi that clung to the walls like stars. In the center, suspended by delicate golden chains, hung the first shard, a black crystal the size of a man's heart. It drank every ray of light that touched it. Elias approached slowly. As his fingers brushed the cool surface, a wave of visions washed over him. He saw great cities rising from sand. He saw wars that had not yet begun. He saw himself, much older, sitting on a wooden porch beside a woman with silver-streaked hair, both of them smiling peacefully as the sun set. The visions were not frightening. They were restful. He carefully detached the crystal and placed it in his satchel. It felt warm against his side, like a living thing that had finally found a friend. That was when the voice echoed through the chamber. "Dr. Hawthorne. Always one step ahead, until you aren't." Colonel Victor von Kessler stepped into the blue light, his white linen suit somehow still pristine. 6 armed men in khaki fanned out behind him. The German's dueling scar twisted as he smiled. Elias raised his hand slowly, but his eyes were already calculating exits. "Von Kessler. You still chase things that don't belong to you." "They belong to whoever is strong enough to take them," the colonel replied. "The crystal. Now." Elias's whip cracked like lightning. It wrapped around the golden chain still hanging from the ceiling. He yanked hard. The remaining chain snapped. Stone dust rained down as the entire mechanism began to collapse. Elias Dove rolled and sprinted toward a narrow side passage while bullets sparked off the ancient walls. The temple awakened in protest. Floors shifted. Giant stone serpents slid from hidden niches with grinding stone sounds. The ceiling began to crack. He ran through collapsing corridors, leaping over widening gaps, using his whip to swing across chasms. Behind him, he could hear von Kessler shouting orders, then cursing as the floor gave way beneath his men. Elias burst out of the temple into blinding sunlight just as the entire cliffside began to slide. He sprinted down a narrow goat path as tons of rock and jungle crashed behind him. When the dust finally settled, there was no sign of the colonel. But Elias knew better. Men like von Kessler never died easily. He made his way to the river, found a small fishing boat, and let the current carry him downstream. For the first time in many years, he slept deeply that night, the black crystal humming softly beside him like a lullaby. The river carried Elias gently for 3 days and nights. He lay in the small fishing boat under a simple woven awning, the black crystal resting against his chest like a warm heartbeat. The gentle rocking of the water, the soft splash of oars, and the distant calls of birds lulled him into the deepest sleep he had known in years. When he finally woke, the jungle had given way to open plains, and the river widened toward the sea. He sold the boat in a quiet port town and boarded a rusty steamer bound for Alexandria. The voyage was calm. Most nights, he stood at the rail watching the stars, feeling the crystal's quiet pull. It no longer showed violent visions, only soft, slow images, wind moving through tall grass, a hand reaching for his in the dark, the sound of rain on a wooden roof. Alexandria greeted him with the scent of salt, spices, and old books. It was well after midnight when Elias slipped through the narrow alleys of the old quarter. He stopped before a faded wooden door tucked between 2 sleeping shops. A small brass plaque read Khalil Rare Manuscripts, by appointment only. He knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more. The door opened immediately. Professor Amora Khalil stood in the lamplight, her dark hair tied back, wearing a simple linen dress. Her eyes, sharp, intelligent, and warm, softened when she saw him. "Elias," she said softly, pulling him inside and bolting the door. "You look like you've been dragged through every temple in Africa." "You look exactly as I remember," he replied, the hint of a tired smile touching his lips. She led him through stacks of ancient books and scrolls into a hidden back room lit by a single green banker's lamp. The air smelled of paper, ink, and sandalwood. Amora poured 2 glasses of cool mint tea and sat across from him. "Show me." Elias placed the black crystal on the velvet cloth between them. It caught the light and held it, then slowly released soft pulses. Amora leaned close, studying it with a magnifying glass. "This is the first shard," she whispered. "I translated references to it years ago. There are 7 in total. When joined, they become the Serpent's eternal shadow, a key to time itself. But the legends always carried a warning: only a heart that seeks rest, not power, can survive the full assembly." They worked through the night in comfortable silence. Amora read from crumbling GEZ and Sanskrit texts while Elias sketched the crystal's markings in his journal. Occasionally, their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. Just before dawn, the quiet was shattered. Glass exploded in the front room. Heavy boots crashed through the shop. "Von Kessler," Elias muttered, already on his feet. He survived. Amora grabbed a small satchel of scrolls. Elias coiled his whip. They moved to the back window as bullets tore through the front door. "Rooftops," Amora said calmly. She had done this before. They climbed out onto the narrow ledge and pulled themselves onto the flat roof. The city of Alexandria spread below them under a fading moon, white domes, minarets, and the dark sea beyond. Shouts rose from the street as von Kessler's men poured into the shop. Elias and Amora ran across the rooftops, leaping the gaps between buildings with practiced ease. Their footsteps were soft, almost rhythmic. For a moment, it felt less like an escape and more like a strange, shared dance under the stars. A bullet whistled past Elias's ear. He spun, cracked his whip, and wrapped it around a wooden clothesline pole, yanking it down to block their pursuers. Amora laughed quietly, a low, beautiful sound that cut through the tension. They descended through an old mosque's courtyard and vanished into the waking Sauk. By sunrise, they were safely aboard a small cargo ship heading east across the Mediterranean. The voyage to India took 19 peaceful days. The sea was kind. Most mornings, Elias and Amora sat on deck under an awning, sharing stories of past adventures. She told him about her years of excavating in Luxor. He spoke of quiet nights in the Peruvian highlands. Slowly, the weight he had carried for decades began to loosen. At night, the crystal would sometimes glow faintly, showing them gentle visions: snow falling on silent mountains, a garden where blue flowers bloomed without sun, 2 figures walking hand in hand along a quiet path. They never spoke of these visions, but both felt them pulling something deep inside their chests. Bombay welcomed them with humid heat and vibrant chaos. From there, they traveled north by train, then by mule through the foothills of the Himalayas. The air grew cooler, thinner, cleaner. Snow-capped peaks appeared like silent guardians in the distance. After 12 days of climbing, they reached the silent monastery, a cluster of white and ochre buildings carved directly into the mountainside, so ancient that even the local villagers had forgotten its true name. The monks here had taken a vow of complete silence for over 1,000 years. They communicated only through gestures and written notes on rice paper. The head monk, an elderly man with eyes that seemed to hold centuries, met them at the great carved gate. He studied Elias for a long time, then wrote in elegant Sanskrit on a small scroll, "You carry the first shard. The second waits. But only if your heart is quiet." For 3 days, the monks tested them, not with words, but with tasks. Elias and Amora helped carry water from a sacred spring, meditated in stone chambers where the only sound was their own breathing, and copied ancient texts by candlelight. The crystal in Elias's satchel grew warmer with each passing day. On the 4th night, the head monk led them deep into the mountain through a narrow passage. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of incense. They entered a vast cavern whose ceiling was inlaid with thousands of tiny crystals that mirrored the night sky outside. In the center stood a stone pedestal. Upon it rested the second black shard, glowing softly. As Elias lifted it, The two shards sang, a low, harmonious hum that vibrated through his bones. Visions returned, stronger now but still gentle, a wooden house on a green hill, smoke rising peacefully from the chimney, laughter echoing softly inside. Amora placed her hand on his shoulder. "You feel it too," she whispered. Before they could leave, the mountain trembled. Von Kessler had found them again. The colonel's voice echoed through the cavern, "This time you will not escape, Hawthorne." Gunfire shattered the ancient silence. Monks moved like ghosts, guiding Elias and Amora toward a hidden exit while stone guardians, massive carved serpents, began to awaken and slide across the floor. Elias fought with calm precision. His whip cracked, disarming two mercenaries. Amora used a heavy bronze incense burner like a staff. Together they retreated across a swaying rope bridge suspended high above a roaring glacial river. Von Kessler pursued, firing as he ran. The bridge groaned under their weight. Elias turned at the far end, cracked his whip around a support rope, and yanked hard. The ancient fibers snapped. The bridge collapsed, sending the colonel and two of his men plummeting into the white mist below. Elias and Amora stood breathing heavily on solid rock as the monks silently closed the mountain behind them. That night, they camped in a high meadow. The two shards hummed softly between them. For the first time in his life, Elias Hawthorne fell asleep without setting a watch. Amora lay nearby, her breathing slow and peaceful. The stars above seemed closer than ever. The descent from the Himalayas was slow and peaceful. Elias and Amora walked in comfortable silence along narrow mountain paths where prayer flags fluttered softly in the wind. The two black shards rested together in Elias's satchel, humming in low harmony that seemed to match the rhythm of their footsteps. Each night they camped in high meadows, the air crisp and cold, the stars so bright they cast faint shadows on the grass. Sleep came easily now, deep and dream-filled. From the foothills, they traveled south by mule, then by train to Calcutta, and finally boarded a weathered cargo ship named the Silent Current bound across the Pacific. The voyage would take nearly a month, but neither of them minded. The sea stretched endlessly and calmly. Most days, they sat on the foredeck under a faded canvas awning, watching flying fish leap from the waves. Amora read aloud from old travel journals while Elias repaired his whip or sketched in his notebook. The crew left them mostly alone, sensing the quiet reverence between the two scholars. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon in shades of rose and gold, Amora leaned her head against Elias's shoulder. "The shards are changing us," she said softly. "I used to chase knowledge like it was something to conquer. Now, I feel like I'm learning how to listen instead." Elias nodded, watching the last light fade. "I spent 20 years running toward the next horizon. This time, the horizon feels like it's inviting me to stop." The crystal shards glowed faintly between them that night, showing gentle visions, ancient stone cities covered in moss, underground rivers glowing with soft blue light, two figures sitting together on a wooden porch as fireflies danced around them. The ship docked in a quiet Mexican port on the Yucatan Peninsula under a sky heavy with tropical rain. From there, they hired mules and a local guide named Mateo, a quiet man with deep knowledge of the jungle. For 9 days, they pushed through dense rainforest where the air was thick with the scent of orchids and damp earth. Howler monkeys called overhead. Bright macaws flashed between the trees. The ground grew softer, wetter, until they reached the sacred cenotes, natural sinkholes filled with crystal-clear turquoise water that led deep into the underworld. The Maya had once believed these pools were gateways to the realm of the gods. Elias now understood why. They descended a long stone staircase carved into the limestone, torches flickering. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the ceiling like a mirror. Mateo stayed above, keeping watch. In the first cenote chamber, they found the third shard resting on a submerged altar, guarded by nothing more than silence. As Elias lifted it from the cool water, the 3 shards sang together. The sound vibrated through the cavern like a distant lullaby. Visions came again, longer this time. He saw himself walking through quiet streets at dusk, felt the weight of years lifting from his shoulders. But peace never lasted long in their world. On the 5th day, deep in the largest underground system, they found shards 4 and 5 together in a hidden temple chamber whose walls were covered in intricate Mayan calendar carvings that glowed faintly. The air here felt thick with centuries of reverence. That was when Isabella Salazar appeared. She stepped from the shadows like a ghost, tall, dark-haired, dressed in practical khaki with a revolver at her hip. Her eyes were sharp and calculating. "Dr. Hawthorne. Professor Khalil. I've been following your progress since Alexandria." Elias's hand moved toward his whip. Amora stood ready beside him. Isabella raised her hand slowly. "I'm not here to fight. Not yet. I represent the Order of the Veiled Serpent, an ancient society sworn to keep the shards separated. But something has changed. Von Kessler survived the mountains. He's coming with 50 men and backing from people who want to weaponize time itself." A tense silence filled the cavern. "Temporary alliance," Isabella offered. "We retrieve the shards, then go our separate ways." Elias studied her for a long moment. Something in her voice rang true. "Agreed," he said finally. "But if you betray us, I know," Isabella replied with a small smile. "You'll use that famous whip." The three of them worked together through the next 2 days. They solved ancient puzzles involving moving stone blocks aligned with the movement of stars. They swam through submerged passages where bioluminescent creatures lit the way like underwater stars. In one breathtaking chamber, a massive stone serpent statue slowly uncoiled as the correct sequence was entered, revealing the 5th shard nestled in its jaws. Each new shard brought deeper rest. Elias found himself sleeping for 12 hours at a time on beds of soft moss, dreaming of nothing but gentle wind and distant waves. Amora's laughter came more easily. Even Isabella seemed affected, her hard edges softening slightly in the quiet darkness. But von Kessler was relentless. On the final night, as they prepared to leave the cenotes, the Germans' forces attacked. Torches flooded the underground chambers. Gunfire echoed horribly off the stone. The three adventurers fought back to back, Elias with whip and revolver, Amora with clever use of ancient levers that triggered stone traps, and Isabella with precise shots. They escaped through a collapsing tunnel, the cenotes rumbling behind them as centuries-old mechanisms awakened in protest. They emerged into the jungle at dawn, covered in mud and exhausted, but with 5 shards now safely together. From the Yucatan, they traveled south by ship and then overland through Central America, the weight of the shards growing heavier yet somehow more comforting. The visions now came even during waking hours, soft, slow scenes of ordinary life that felt more precious than any treasure. They reached Machu Picchu at first light. The lost city of the Inca sat high in the Andes, shrouded in mist. Terraces of emerald green stepped down the mountainside like a staircase for giants. Here, according to the combined clues from all 5 shards, the 6th piece waited. Isabella led them along hidden paths known only to her order. They climbed in silence, the morning mist swirling around their legs. The air was thin and pure. In a secret chamber beneath the Temple of the Sun, they found the 6th shard, larger than the others, pulsing with a deep inner light. As the 6 shards joined, the hum became a single clear note that resonated through the ancient stones. For the first time, the vision showed them the final island, a place that appeared on no maps, floating between dream and reality. But von Kessler had beaten them there. His men swarmed the terraces. A fierce battle erupted at sunrise, one of the most beautiful and dangerous fights of Elias's life. Bullets sparked off Inca stone while the sky turned pink and gold. Isabella took a grazing wound to her arm. Amora moved with graceful precision, triggering ancient defenses that sent boulders rolling down the slopes. Elias stood at the highest point, whip cracking like thunder, protecting the satchel with his life. In the chaos, Isabella made her choice. She turned on von Kessler's lieutenant, buying them precious minutes. "Run," she shouted. "I'll hold them." Elias and Amora fled down the terraces, hearts pounding, the 6 shards singing loudly now. Behind them, the sounds of battle slowly faded. They reached a small village at the base of the mountain as night fell. There, in a simple hut, they tended their wounds and listened to the rain on the thatched roof. Amora leaned against Elias, her head on his chest. "We're getting close," she whispered. "Close to the end of the chase." Elias stroked her hair gently. "And maybe the beginning of something quieter." They slept deeply that night, the shards resting between them like old friends, their glow soft and steady. The final leg of the journey awaited, the Phantom Island where the seventh shard and the cradle of the Serpent itself lay waiting. The journey to the Phantom Island took 22 days by sea. Elias and Amora boarded a small, weathered trading schooner in a forgotten Peruvian port. The captain, an old Chilean named Ruiz, asked no questions when they paid him in gold and requested a course southwest until the stars say otherwise. The crew was small and quiet, moving about their duties with the gentle rhythm of men who had long ago accepted the sea's mysteries. The Pacific was unusually kind. Days blended into one another like soft watercolors. Mornings brought golden light spilling across calm waves. Afternoons were spent under the shade of sails, where Elias and Amora sat side by side, the 6 black shards resting in an open wooden box between them. The crystals hummed continuously now, a low, soothing tone that seemed to synchronize with the gentle creak of the ship and the whisper of wind in the rigging. Amora would sometimes read passages from old journals she had brought. Elias listened with half-closed eyes, letting the words drift over him like a warm breeze. At night, they lay on deck under blankets, watching constellations wheel slowly overhead. The shards glowed with a faint silver light, projecting slow, peaceful visions across the sails, meadows swaying in the wind, rivers flowing without hurry, 2 figures growing old together on a quiet porch. Sleep had become something sacred. Elias no longer fought it. He surrendered each night, sinking into depths he had never known. Dreams came gentle and wordless, just feelings of safety, of belonging, of finally arriving. On the 22nd night, the stars changed. Captain Ruiz called them to the bow. "There," he said softly, pointing. The island that should not be. A low silhouette had appeared on the horizon where no land had any right to exist. It shimmered slightly, as though existing between 2 worlds. As the schooner drew closer, the Phantom Island revealed itself, a perfect circular atoll surrounding a dormant volcano, covered in impossible lush vegetation that glowed faintly under moonlight. They anchored in a hidden lagoon. Ruiz and his crew agreed to wait exactly 7 days. No more. Elias and Amora rowed ashore in a small dinghy. The moment their boots touched the black sand, the 6 shards flared brightly for a moment, then settled. The air felt different here, thicker, kinder, like a blanket wrapped around tired shoulders. They walked inland through forests where trees bore fruit that shimmered like stars and flowers released scents of warm milk and distant rain. No insects bit them. No dangers appeared. The island itself seemed to welcome weary travelers. For 2 full days, they explored without hurry. They found ancient stone paths leading upward, carved with serpents that seemed to move when viewed from the corner of the eye. Birds with luminous feathers sang soft melodies that lingered in the air long after they had flown away. Waterfalls cascaded into pools so clear they reflected the sky perfectly. On the 3rd morning, they reached the volcano's crater. A wide spiral staircase descended into the heart of the mountain, each step worn smooth by centuries of careful feet. Torches were unnecessary, the walls themselves emitted a soft bioluminescent glow. The deeper they went, the more peaceful everything became. Even their breathing slowed. At the very bottom lay the cradle of the Serpent. It was a cathedral-sized cavern whose ceiling sparkled with crystals mirroring the night sky above. In the center stood a massive circular platform made of black volcanic glass. Upon it rested the 7th and final shard, larger than the rest, pulsing with deep inner light. As Elias lifted it, all 7 shards sang together in perfect harmony. The sound filled the cavern like a living lullaby. Visions flooded them both, not overwhelming, but gentle and complete. They saw the entire span of their lives, the adventures, the losses, the quiet moments they had missed. And at the end, always, the small wooden house on the green hill. Tears came to Amora's eyes. "This is what it was always leading us toward," she whispered. "Not power. Rest." But the island was not finished testing them. A familiar voice echoed from the far side of the cavern. Beautiful, isn't it? Almost makes a man want to retire. Colonel Victor von Kessler stepped into the light, limping slightly but alive. His white suit was torn and stained, yet his eyes still burned with ambition. 20 armed men followed him, their faces hard. "You should have stayed dead in the mountains," Elias said calmly. Von Kessler smiled. "Men like me don't die easily, Hawthorne. Now, hand over the shards. With these, I can end wars before they begin. I can reshape the world." Elias looked at Amora. She gave him the smallest nod. The final confrontation was strangely quiet. No wild shouting. No frantic running. The fight unfolded like a slow, inevitable dance. Elias used his whip with deliberate, almost peaceful precision, disarming men rather than harming them. Amora triggered ancient mechanisms in the cavern, gentle stone doors that sealed passages, soft winds that blew torches out. Even the mercenaries seemed affected by the island's calm. Many lowered their weapons after only brief resistance. Von Kessler fought desperately, but the weight of the 7 shards was too much for a heart filled with greed. When he finally reached for the completed circle, the cavern itself rejected him. The ground trembled softly. Cracks appeared beneath his feet. In that moment, Elias faced the choice. The 7 shards, now joined on the platform, formed a perfect glowing ring. Light, ancient, pure, and kind, poured upward. He could take it. He could become master of time. He could prevent every tragedy he had ever witnessed. He could live forever. Or he could let it rest. Amora stood beside him, bleeding from a small cut on her forehead but smiling with quiet certainty. Elias looked into the light for a long time. Then he stepped forward and carefully placed the completed serpent's shadow back into its ancient cradle. The light flared once, so bright and beautiful it brought tears to everyone's eyes, then slowly faded. The power withdrew. The shards grew dark and still, nothing more than beautiful black glass. Time would remain untouched. Von Kessler screamed in rage as the cavern began to collapse in the gentlest way possible. Stone fell like slow rain. The volcano above rumbled, not in fury but in release. Lava flowed in peaceful, glowing rivers that avoided the paths where people walked. Elias took Amora's hand. They ran together up the spiral stairs, calm and unhurried. Behind them, the colonel was gently swallowed by the mountain, still clutching at empty power. They emerged onto the surface as the volcano erupted in a spectacular but harmless display of fire and glowing ash against the night sky. The island was sinking, slowly, gracefully, returning to the realm between dreams and reality. The small dinghy waited at the lagoon. Captain Ruiz had kept his word. They rowed out to the schooner as the phantom island disappeared behind them, leaving only calm sea where it had been. That night on the ship, Elias and Amora stood at the rail. The 7 dark shards rested in a simple wooden box, beautiful souvenirs, nothing more. Amora leaned against him. "You chose well," she whispered. "I chose us," he replied. They slept deeply as the ship sailed north under a sky full of stars. They reached the small Andean village at the base of Machu Picchu as soft rain began to fall. The thatched roofs glistened under lantern light. A kind old woman named Rosa offered them a simple hut with a warm fire and thick wool blankets. No questions were asked. In these mountains, strangers with tired eyes were simply given rest. Elias and Amora sat by the fire that night, the 6 black shards resting on a low wooden table between them. Their gentle humming mixed with the sound of rain on the roof, a perfect, soothing rhythm. Isabella had stayed behind to cover their escape. They hoped she was safe, but the shards seemed to whisper that all paths were now leading toward something quieter. For the first time in many weeks, they allowed themselves to truly stop. The next 10 days passed like a long, gentle exhale. Each morning, they woke to the sound of mist moving through the valley. Elias would step outside, breathe the cold, clean air, and feel years of tension slowly leaving his body. Amora prepared simple meals, maize porridge with wild honey, fresh herbs from the garden behind the hut. They spoke very little. Words were no longer necessary. In the afternoons, they walked slow paths along ancient Inca terraces. The grass was soft underfoot. Clouds drifted lazily across the mountains. Sometimes they would sit for hours on a stone wall, watching condors glide silently on warm currents far below. The 6 Shard stayed in the hut, but their presence could still be felt, a quiet warmth that made the world feel softer around the edges. One evening, as golden light bathed the peaks, Amora leaned against Elias and said, "I don't want to chase anymore." He nodded, pulling her closer. "Then we won't." On the 11th day, they left the village and began the long, peaceful journey toward the coast. They traveled by mule cart, then by river boat, then by slow coastal steamer. Every leg of the trip was taken at the gentlest pace possible. No rushing. No looking over their shoulders. The Pacific Ocean greeted them again like an old friend. They boarded a modest cargo vessel called La Esperanza, the Hope. The captain, a quiet Peruvian man, gave them the best cabin and told the crew to leave the 2 passengers undisturbed. The ship moved slowly southward along the coast before turning west into open water. For 38 days, the sea became their home. The days blended most beautifully. Mornings, soft sunlight on calm water, Elias standing at the rail with a cup of coffee, watching dolphins play alongside the ship. Afternoons, Amora reading old poetry aloud while he repaired small things on deck, a loose rope, a torn sail, anything that let his hands stay busy without hurry. Evenings, long, slow sunsets that painted the sky in rose, lavender, and gold for nearly an hour. Nights, lying together under the stars, the 6 Shards glowing faintly in their wooden box, showing only peaceful visions, a house, a garden, quiet years stretching ahead. Sleep became deeper with every passing night. Elias would fall asleep to the gentle creak of the ship and the rhythm of Amora's breathing. He dreamed of nothing violent or urgent anymore, only soft fields, warm fires, and the feeling of coming home. The Shards continued to change them. With each day at sea, the weight of his old life dissolved further. The man who once needed constant motion now found joy in watching clouds move. The woman who once lived for ancient secrets now found peace in the simple act of holding his hand. One particularly calm night, when the sea was like glass, and the moon made a silver path across the water, they brought all 6 Shards on deck. They sat in a circle of soft lantern light and let the crystals hum. The visions came slowly, lovingly, a wooden house on a green hill. Smoke rising from the chimney on autumn evenings. 2 chairs on a wide porch. Silver hair. Laughing wrinkles. Long, quiet years together. No empires. No wars. No power. Just life. On the 38th day, they sighted the Phantom Island. It appeared gradually, as though the sea itself was gently offering it to them. A perfect ring of land surrounding a single sleeping volcano, covered in lush green that glowed faintly under moonlight. The ship anchored in a hidden lagoon. The captain agreed to wait as long as needed, something in the island's presence made him unusually patient. Elias and Amora rowed ashore alone. The moment their feet touched the black sand, a deep sense of belonging washed over them. The air was warm and carried the scent of night-blooming flowers. Trees with luminous leaves lined the path. Strange but gentle birds sang softly, repeating melodies that sounded like lullabies. They walked for days without hurry. There was no need to rush. The island seemed to stretch time itself. They wandered through forests where fruit fell gently into their hands when they were hungry. They bathed in warm pools fed by underground springs. They slept on beds of soft moss under canopies that glowed with fireflies. Every night, the Shards grew warmer and their humming softer. On the 7th day, they reached the volcano. A wide, beautifully carved staircase spiraled down into the mountain. The walls glowed with soft inner light. The deeper they descended, the more peaceful they felt. No fear. No danger. Only the quiet knowledge that they were exactly where they needed to be. At the bottom lay the cradle, a vast, cathedral-like cavern with a ceiling of living crystals that mirrored the sky above. In the center was a perfect circle of black volcanic glass. The 7th Shard waited there, pulsing slowly like a resting heart. Elias lifted it with both hands. The The moment the seventh shard joined the others, all seven sang together, not loudly, but in a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through their bones and into their souls. The sound wrapped around them like the warmest blanket. Visions came, but they were no longer urgent. They were complete. They saw their entire future, quiet, ordinary, and deeply beautiful. They saw the house. They saw themselves growing old together. They saw peaceful mornings and gentle evenings. And they saw that this was the greatest treasure anyone could ever find. Colonel von Kessler never reached the island. Some forces in the world simply cannot touch places like this. The man who lived for power was left behind in the noise of his own making. The island allowed only those who sought rest. Elias and Amora stayed in the cradle for many days, or perhaps it was only hours. Time had become gentle and flexible. They slept there on soft stone beds that seemed made for them. They talked quietly about everything and nothing. They held each other as the seven shards slowly dimmed, their power choosing to rest rather than rule. When they finally climbed back to the surface, the volcano gave one last gentle sigh, a beautiful display of glowing ash and soft fire against the night sky. The island began to fade, returning peacefully to the veil between worlds. They rowed back to the ship. The captain simply nodded, as though he had expected nothing less. The return voyage was even slower, even kinder. The sea itself seemed to carry them with extra care. Elias and Amora spent the weeks talking about the house they would make their own. They planned the garden. They chose colors for the walls. They imagined quiet evenings on the porch. When they finally reached the harbor in New England, many weeks later, the world felt new. The ship glided into the quiet harbor on a misty morning in early spring. New England welcomed them with cool air and the faint scent of pine and salt. Elias and Amora stepped onto the dock hand in hand, carrying only a small wooden chest and two worn satchels. The seven dark shards rested inside the chest, silent now, beautiful, and at peace. They bought an old Ford truck from a farmer near the harbor. The drive north through the countryside was slow and gentle. Cherry blossoms lined the roads. Fields were turning green again. Every mile felt like another layer of the old life falling away. The house on the hill was waiting exactly as the shards had shown them. It stood nestled among ancient oak trees, its wooden walls weathered to a soft gray, with a wide porch facing the valley. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney. Elias had bought the property years ago on instinct. Today, it finally felt like home. They moved in without a rush. Elias hung his faded fedora on the wooden peg by the front door. The bullwhip was coiled neatly on the top shelf of the study, never to be used again. His leather jacket found a quiet hook in the closet. The revolver was placed, unloaded, in a drawer and forgotten. The old satchel was tucked away in the attic. The seven shards were arranged with care on the wide mantel above the fireplace. They caught the firelight beautifully, but no longer hummed or showed visions. They had become simple, elegant keepsakes, reminders of a long journey that had finally ended. The first months were pure healing. Spring turned into summer. They planted a large garden together, tomatoes, herbs, sunflowers, and lavender. Elias learned to wake up slowly, to enjoy the first cup of coffee on the porch while watching mist rise from the valley. Amora filled the house with books and the scent of fresh bread. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, broken only by occasional soft laughter. Evenings were spent on the wide porch swing. They would sit wrapped in a single blanket as fireflies danced across the meadow below. Sometimes they talked about their adventures, but now the stories felt like gentle bedtime tales rather than battles. The collapsing temple in Ethiopia became the night the mountains sang us to sleep. The rooftops of Alexandria became the night we danced across the stars. Sleep had become the greatest treasure of all. Every night, they climbed into the large wooden bed with its thick quilt. Elias would listen to Amora's breathing slow down beside him, feel the warmth of her hand in his, and drift into the deepest, most peaceful rest. No nightmares. No sudden awakenings. Just long, slow, restorative sleep that left them refreshed each morning. Years passed softly, like pages turning in a favorite book. Their hair gradually turned silver. Small lines appeared around their eyes and mouths from years of smiling. Their steps grew slower and more deliberate, but their hearts remained light and full. Old colleagues from the university sometimes visited. They would sit on the porch in the summer shade, drinking lemonade, listening in quiet wonder as Elias told softened versions of the tale. No one fully believed the part about the Phantom Island, but everyone could see the deep peace in both of them. One autumn evening, many years later, Elias took Amora's hand and led her behind the house to the oldest oak tree. He carried the wooden chest. "We don't need to keep them above the fire anymore," he said gently. Together, they dug a small hole beneath the roots and placed the 7 dark shards inside. Not to hide them, but to let them rest forever in the earth. Elias covered the hole with soft soil and patted it gently. "They gave us everything we needed," Amora whispered. "And now they can sleep too," Elias replied. That night, they lit a fire in the hearth and sat together on the rug in front of it. The flames crackled softly. Outside, gentle rain began to fall on the roof, a perfect, soothing sound. Amora rested her head on Elias's shoulder. "Do you ever miss the old life?" she asked quietly. He thought for a long moment, then smiled. "I miss nothing. Because everything I was searching for, I found it right here." Winter came again, gentle and white. They kept the house warm. They read books aloud to each other. They baked bread. They watched the snow fall from the porch, wrapped in blankets. On the quietest nights, Elias would sometimes take out the single tiny fragment of crystal he had kept in his pocket all these years. He would hold it up to the firelight, watch it glow softly one last time, and smile. Then he would put it away and go to bed. Many more years flowed by like a calm river. One warm summer night, when they were both very old, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The valley below was full of fireflies. The air smelled of honeysuckle and fresh grass. Amora leaned against him, her silver hair shining in the moonlight. "Elias," she whispered, her voice soft as the night breeze, "I think I'm ready to rest now." He kissed the top of her head and held her close. "So am I." They went inside together for the last time. Elias built a small, perfect fire in the hearth. They lay down in their bed, pulled the familiar quilt over themselves, and listened to the gentle crackle of the flames and the soft night sounds outside. Elias took Amora's hand. Their fingers intertwined one final time. As sleep came to claim them both, he whispered the last words he would ever speak in this world: "Thank you for the greatest adventure of all, coming home." The fire burned lower. The house grew still and peaceful. Outside, the wind moved softly through the oak trees, and the stars kept their ancient, gentle watch. Dr. Elias Hawthorne and Professor Amora Khalil drifted together into the deepest, kindest sleep imaginable, the kind of sleep that feels like returning to the source of all things. And somewhere far beyond the veil of stars, in the quiet place where the eternal serpent finally rests, a soft voice whispered across the sands, "Well done, travelers. You have found the only treasure worth keeping." The fire in the hearth burned lower and lower until only soft red embers remained, casting a gentle glow across the wooden floor. Elias and Amora lay together under the thick quilt, their breathing slow and perfectly in sync. Outside, the night wind moved through the oak trees with a sound like distant waves on a faraway shore. The house creaked softly, as if settling in for its own long rest. Sleep did not come all at once. It arrived in gentle layers. First came the simple awareness of warmth, the quilt heavy and comforting, Amora's hand still loosely holding his. Then came the slowing of thoughts. Memories of temples and chases drifted by like clouds seen from a great distance, no longer urgent, no longer sharp, just soft shapes that passed without needing attention. Elias felt his body grow heavier, sinking deeper into the mattress. The scar on his left eyebrow, the old ache in his right knee from that fall in the Andes, all of it faded into a pleasant, distant warmth. He listened to the rain that had begun outside, soft and steady, tapping on the roof like a lullaby written just for them. Amora sighed once, a small, contented sound, and shifted closer. Her silver hair brushed his cheek. In the quiet dark, He could feel her smile even without seeing it. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had become elastic here, kind and unhurried. The embers glowed softer. The rain continued its gentle rhythm. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, then fell silent again. And still they slept. The next morning dawned soft and golden. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains that Amora had hung the previous spring. Elias woke first, as he often did now, and lay still for a long while simply watching the dust motes dance in the light. No rush to rise. No need to check for danger. He turned his head and looked at Amora, still sleeping peacefully, her face relaxed in a way he had never seen in all their years of adventure. He slipped out of bed quietly, put on his old slippers, and made his way to the kitchen. The wooden floorboards were cool under his feet. He boiled water for tea, the kettle whistling low and friendly. While it steeped, he stood at the window, looking out over the valley. Mist still clung to the lower fields. Birds moved between the trees with lazy flaps of wings. When Amora finally joined him, they sat on the porch with their mugs, saying nothing for nearly an hour. The silence was full and perfect. This became their new rhythm. Spring unfolded slowly. The garden they had planted years earlier burst into color, sunflowers taller than Elias, lavender bushes humming with bees, tomato vines heavy with fruit. Each morning, they walked the rows together, fingers brushing as they picked what was ripe. Elias learned to move with deliberate slowness, enjoying the feel of warm soil between his fingers. Amora hummed old Egyptian folk songs under her breath while she weeded. Afternoons were for reading. They had built a small library in the sunroom, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with the books they had collected across continents. Elias would choose a volume at random and read aloud while Amora knitted or simply listened with her eyes half closed. Sometimes they switched roles. The stories were no longer about danger, they read poetry, old travel journals, children's tales, anything that felt gentle and wandering. Evenings brought the porch swing again. They would sit side by side, the wooden chains creaking softly as they rocked. Fireflies rose from the meadow like slow sparks. The valley below turned purple in the twilight. They talked in low voices about small things, the way the light hit the oak leaves that day, the taste of the honey from the neighbor's bees, the dream Amora had the night before about floating down the Nile on a boat made of stars. Night after night, sleep came easier. Elias discovered he could now fall asleep within minutes of closing his eyes. The old habit of one ear always listening for trouble had vanished completely. He slept through rainstorms, through the distant howl of coyotes, through the creak of the house settling. His dreams, when they came, were long and slow, walking endless soft dunes at sunset, sitting in underground gardens where blue flowers bloomed forever, holding Amora's hand while time itself paused to let them rest. Summer brought warm nights and open windows. They slept with the scent of honeysuckle drifting in. Sometimes they would wake together in the middle of the night, smile at each other in the dark, and simply listen to the crickets outside until sleep claimed them again. Autumn arrived with crisp air and falling leaves. They spent long afternoons raking the yard together, not because it needed to be perfect, but because the motion felt good and the company was better. In the evenings, they lit the fireplace earlier. The flames crackled and popped in a friendly way. Elias would read while Amora rested her head in his lap. The 7 shards, now buried beneath the oak tree, seemed to send up a quiet blessing through the roots, a feeling of deep contentment that filled the whole house. Winter was their favorite season for sleeping. Snow blanketed the hill for weeks at a time. The world outside grew hushed. Inside, the fire burned steadily. They kept the bed piled high with extra quilts. Mornings, they would stay under the covers longer, watching the snow fall past the window. Elias would make hot cocoa with extra cinnamon, and they would drink it slowly while the house creaked and the wind whispered against the eaves. On the longest nights, they would lie awake for a while on purpose, not because they couldn't sleep, but because they wanted to enjoy the simple fact that they could sleep whenever they chose. No deadlines. No pursuits. Just the two of them, warm and safe, listening to each other breathe. Years continued to pass in this gentle way. Their hair grew whiter. Their steps grew slower. Their voices grew softer. Yet every day felt full, not with excitement, but with a deep, quiet satisfaction that neither of them had ever known during their adventuring years. Old friends still visited occasionally. They would sit on the porch in summer or by the fire in winter and listen as Elias told the story of the serpent's shadow. He told it differently now, slower, with longer pauses, focusing on the peaceful parts, the gentle rocking of the ship, the soft glow of the crystals, the night they chose rest over power. The visitors always left feeling calmer than when they arrived, as if the house itself had shared a little of its peace with them. One particularly quiet winter evening, when they were both very old, Elias and Amora sat on the porch wrapped in the same blanket they had used for decades. Snow fell softly. The valley was white and silent. Amora rested her head on his shoulder the way she always had. "Elias," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the falling snow, "I think we finally reached the last temple." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "And this one doesn't have any traps," he replied. They stayed outside until the cold gently nudged them back in. They built the fire one last time. They climbed into bed together. Elias took her hand exactly as he had done thousands of nights before. As sleep began to settle over them both, deeper and kinder than ever, he whispered the same words he had whispered for years, "Thank you for the rest." The fire burned lower. The snow continued to fall outside. The oak tree stood guard over the buried shards. The house held them both in its warm, wooden embrace. And somewhere far beyond the quiet hill, beyond the valley, beyond the stars themselves, the eternal serpent coiled gently in its endless sleep and smiled. The adventurers had come home. They had finally, completely, perfectly rested. The snow kept falling for many days after that quiet winter evening. It covered the roof, the porch, the garden, and the old oak tree in a thick, soft blanket of white. Inside the house, Elias and Amora moved even more slowly, savoring every small moment. Each morning, Elias would wake first. He would lie still for a long time, listening to the absolute silence that only deep snow can create. No wind. No birds. Just the gentle sound of Amora breathing beside him. When he finally rose, he put on his thick wool robe and slippers and shuffled to the kitchen. The kettle took its time to boil. He made 2 cups of tea with honey and a touch of cinnamon, exactly the way they both liked it now. He carried the mugs back to the bedroom and set them on the nightstand. Amora would stir slowly, open her eyes, and smile at him the same way she had smiled for decades. They would drink their tea in bed, propped up against pillows, watching the snow fall past the window in large, lazy flakes. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. The silence was warm and complete. When the snow finally stopped, they bundled up and went outside together. The world was hushed. Their boots made soft crunching sounds as they walked around the house. Elias cleared a path to the oak tree. Amora brushed snow from the lower branches. They stood there for a long while, looking at the spot where the 7 shards rested beneath the roots. No words were needed. They both felt the same deep gratitude. Back inside, they lit the fire and spent the rest of the day reading. Elias chose an old book of poetry about mountains and quiet valleys. He read each line slowly, letting the words settle in the air before moving to the next. Amora listened with her eyes closed, occasionally nodding or squeezing his hand when a line touched her. This pattern repeated gently through the rest of winter. Long mornings in bed. Slow cups of tea. Quiet afternoons by the fire. Early evenings on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the valley sleep under snow. Deep, uninterrupted nights of sleep that felt like floating on warm clouds. Spring arrived late that year, but when it came, it was soft and kind. The snow melted gradually. First the porch, then the garden paths, then the fields in the valley. Tiny green shoots pushed through the earth. Elias and Amora spent hours each day in the garden, kneeling on soft pads, planting new seeds and tending old plants. Their hands moved slowly through the soil. They spoke in whispers about how tall the sunflowers might grow this year, how sweet the tomatoes would taste in August. Every afternoon, they rested on the porch swing for a long nap. The chains creaked rhythmically. Warm sunlight touched their faces. Birds sang lazy songs in the trees. Sleep came easily, wrapping around them like a second blanket. As the days grew warmer, they began taking longer walks. They walked the hill paths every morning after breakfast. Sometimes they went as far as the old stone wall at the edge of the property and sat there for an hour, looking out over the valley. Sometimes they walked down to the small stream at the bottom of the hill, where they would sit on flat rocks and listen to the water moving over stones. The sound was constant and soothing, the same gentle rhythm day after day. Evenings grew longer. They kept the windows open so the night air could flow through the house. The scent of blooming honeysuckle and fresh grass drifted in while they lay in bed. Crickets sang outside. Occasionally, a distant train whistle carried across the valley, a lonely, friendly sound that always made them smile. Summer brought fireflies and warm nights. They slept with the windows wide open. The quilt was folded at the foot of the bed. They lay on top of the sheets, feeling the soft breeze move across their skin. Sometimes they would wake in the middle of the night, look at each other, and simply smile before drifting off again. The fireflies outside danced like slow stars. The oak tree rustled gently. The whole world felt like it was breathing with them. They spent many afternoons in the garden hammock Elias had hung between two trees. They rocked slowly, taking turns reading chapters from old novels. When they grew tired of reading, they simply closed their eyes and listened to the bees working in the lavender, the wind in the leaves, and their own slow breathing. One particularly warm evening, they stayed in the hammock until the stars came out. They fell asleep there together under a light blanket, waking only when the morning dew touched their faces. They laughed softly at themselves and went inside for tea. Autumn returned with golden light and falling leaves. They raked the yard together in short sessions, resting often on the porch. The leaves made a soft carpet under their feet. Elias and Amora collected the brightest ones and pressed them between the pages of books. In the evenings, they lit the fireplace earlier. The crackling sounds mixed with the wind outside. They drank warm spiced cider and talked about nothing important, the color of the sunset, the way the light looked on the oak tree, how peaceful the house felt. Sleep in autumn was especially deep. The cooler air made the bed feel like the most perfect place in the world. They would fall asleep listening to the rain or the wind or the occasional hoot of an owl, sinking into rest so complete that time itself seemed to pause. Winter came again, and the cycle continued, soft, slow, and kind. Year after year, the seasons turned. Their bodies grew older, but their hearts stayed light. Their love became quieter, deeper, more certain. Every night, they held hands as they fell asleep. Every morning, they woke grateful to still be together. On the very quietest nights, when the house was completely still, Elias would sometimes whisper the same words he had whispered for so many years, "Thank you for bringing me home." Amora would squeeze his hand and answer, even in her sleep, with a soft, contented sigh. And so they rested. Through spring mornings and summer fireflies. Through autumn leaves and winter snow. Through all the gentle years that remained. The adventurers had laid down their whips and maps. The scholars had closed their final books. The two souls who had crossed oceans and continents had finally found the only treasure that mattered, deep, peaceful, endless rest. The house on the hill held them gently. The oak tree stood watch. The buried shard slept beneath the roots. And the world turned on, soft and quiet, around two people who had finally stopped searching, and simply were. They fell asleep there together in the gentle sway of the hammock, the warm summer air moving softly over them. The fireflies continued their slow dance around the garden. The oak tree stood watch. Neither of them stirred until the first pale light of dawn touched the eastern sky. When they woke, the world was still quiet. Dew sparkled on the grass. A single bird began its morning song, soft and hesitant at first, then joined by others in a gentle chorus. Elias and Amora lay there a long while, listening, not wanting to break the perfect stillness of the moment. Eventually, they rose, stretched slowly, and walked back to the house hand in hand. Breakfast was simple and slow, fresh bread from the oven, honey from the neighbors' hives, ripe peaches from their own tree. They ate on the porch, savoring each bite, watching the sun climb higher and warm the valley. This became the rhythm of their summers. Long mornings in the garden or hammock. Afternoons spent reading or simply sitting together in comfortable silence. Evenings on the porch swing as the fireflies rose. Nights with windows open, sleeping deeply to the sound of crickets and distant owls. They rarely left the hill anymore. The world outside had grown loud and fast, but their small home remained a pocket of deep calm. Old friends still visited once or twice a year, always leaving refreshed, as if the house itself had shared its peace. Autumn arrived with golden light and falling leaves. The garden slowed down. They harvested the last tomatoes and herbs, storing them carefully in the root cellar. Elias and Amora spent long afternoons raking leaves into soft piles, then sitting among them, letting the warm sun touch their faces. The air smelled of earth and wood smoke. They began lighting the fireplace earlier each evening. The crackle of logs became a new lullaby. Elias would read poetry or old travel journals while Amora knitted or embroidered. Sometimes they simply watched the flames dance for hours, saying nothing, perfectly content. Sleep in autumn felt especially deep. The cooler nights made the bed feel like a warm cocoon. They piled on extra blankets and slept longer each night. Elias often woke in the middle of the night, listened to the wind moving through the dry leaves outside, and felt a profound gratitude settle over him before drifting off again. Winter returned, softer and quieter than the last. Snow fell in large, gentle flakes. The house became a warm sanctuary. They kept the fire going from morning until night. Mornings were spent in bed with tea and books. Afternoons by the window watching the snow. Evenings wrapped in blankets on the porch, breathing the cold, clean air before returning to the warmth inside. One particularly heavy snowfall kept them inside for 6 straight days. They didn't mind. They played old card games, told each other stories from their youth, baked bread together in the warm kitchen, and slept more than they had in years. The snow created a cocoon of silence around the house. No outside world existed. Only the two of them, the fire, and the deep, healing rest. When the snow finally melted, spring came again, the same gentle cycle repeating. Year after year, season after season, their life on the hill flowed like a quiet river. They grew older together in the kindest possible way. Their movements became slower, their voices softer, their love deeper and more wordless. Elias's hair turned pure white. Amora's laugh lines grew more pronounced, but her smile remained as warm as ever. They walked the garden paths more slowly now, stopping often to rest on the wooden benches Elias had built. They spent longer periods in the hammock, longer periods in bed, longer periods simply being together. The stars appeared one by one above the valley as Elias and Amora sat together on the swing. The chains made their familiar soft creaking sound with every gentle rock. The night air was cool but not cold, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from a distant chimney and the earthy smell of fallen leaves. They stayed there for a long, long time, longer than usual. Neither felt the need to speak. The silence between them had become its own language, rich and comforting after so many decades together. Occasionally, Amora would sigh softly, a contented sound, and Elias would squeeze her hand in reply. When they finally went inside, the house welcomed them with its familiar warmth. Elias built a small fire in the hearth, arranging the logs carefully so it would burn slowly through the night. The flames caught gradually, crackling in a low, friendly rhythm. They changed into their nightclothes, soft, well-worn cotton, and climbed into the large wooden bed. The quilt was heavy and familiar. They lay on their backs for a while, looking up at the ceiling beams, listening to the fire and the occasional soft hoot of an owl outside. Elias reached over and took Amora's hand again. Their fingers intertwined with the effortless grace that comes only from years of practice. Sleep arrived in layers, as it always did now. First, the body grew heavy. Then the thoughts slowed until they drifted like leaves on a still pond. Then came the deep, warm darkness, the kind of sleep that feels like sinking into a featherbed made of clouds. No dreams interrupted them that night. Only pure, healing rest. Morning light filtered through the curtains in soft gold. Elias woke first again. He lay still for nearly 30 minutes, simply breathing, feeling the peace of the house around him. When Amora stirred, they repeated their gentle morning ritual: tea in bed, slow conversation about nothing important, watching the light move across the room. This pattern continued through the rest of autumn. Raking leaves in short, easy sessions. Pressing colorful leaves in books. Long afternoons by the fire with poetry or old letters. Evenings on the porch until the chill drove them inside. Nights of deep, uninterrupted sleep filled with quiet breathing and the soft sounds of the house. Winter came again, wrapping the hill in white. The snow fell for days. The world outside became muffled and peaceful. Inside, the fire burned steadily. They spent entire days in bed or by the window, drinking endless cups of tea, reading, napping, and talking in low voices. Sometimes they played simple card games they had invented over the years. Sometimes they just sat together holding hands, watching the snow. The silence of winter was especially healing. No outside noise reached them. Only the occasional creak of the house and the soft hiss of snow against the windows. They slept longer than ever, 12, 13, sometimes 14 hours at a time. Their bodies and minds drank in the rest like dry earth drinks rain. When spring finally returned, the garden called them back. They planted new seeds together: carrots, beans, more lavender, more sunflowers. Their hands moved slowly through the warm soil. They rested often on the benches Elias had built years earlier. The bees returned. The birds built nests in the eaves. Everything felt new and yet perfectly familiar. Summer brought the hammock days again. They spent whole afternoons rocking gently between the two trees, taking turns reading chapters from old books. When they grew tired of reading, they simply closed their eyes and listened to the wind in the leaves, to the bees in the flowers, to each other's slow breathing. They fell asleep in the hammock many times, waking only when the sun had moved and the air had cooled. One perfect summer night, they stayed outside until nearly dawn. The fireflies were especially bright. The stars felt close enough to touch. They talked quietly about their life together, the temples, the oceans, the decision they had made on the Phantom Island. But the memories were soft now, wrapped in gratitude rather than excitement. "I would choose this every time," Amora whispered. "So would I," Elias replied. They fell asleep in the hammock again, waking to birdsong and dew. The seasons continued their gentle turning. Autumn. Winter. Spring. Summer. Year after year. Decade after decade. Their hair became completely white. Their steps became very slow and careful. They needed help with some tasks now, but kind neighbors from the valley sometimes came up the hill to lend a hand. Everyone who visited left feeling calmer, as though the house breathed out peace. Elias and Amora spent more and more time in bed, not because they were ill, but because they had earned the right to rest as much as they wanted. They would lie there for hours, talking softly, remembering, or simply being quiet. The bed had become the center of their world, a warm, safe island where time moved at its kindest pace. On the very quietest nights, when the house was completely still, Elias would whisper the same blessing he had whispered for so many years: "Thank you for every gentle day, and for bringing me home to you." Amora would always answer by squeezing his hand, even if she was already half asleep. And so they rested. Through golden summers and snowy winters. Through blooming springs and quiet autumns. Through all the beautiful, ordinary, perfect years they had left. The adventurers had long ago laid down their whips. The explorers had folded their maps. The two hearts that once raced across continents now beat slowly and steadily together. The house on the hill held them. The oak tree stood watch over the buried shards. The valley slept peacefully below. And in the deepest, kindest sleep imaginable, Elias and Amora drifted together, two souls who had searched the world for treasure and finally found it in the simple, quiet act of resting side by side. The bed had become their favorite place in the world. It was large, made of solid oak, with a thick mattress and layers of quilts that smelled faintly of lavender from the garden. Elias and Amora would spend entire mornings there after waking, propped up against pillows, drinking tea, watching the light change across the room, and listening to the sounds of the house and the valley outside. Some days they talked about small things, the way the sunlight looked on the wooden floor, how the birds sounded different in each season, the flavor of the honey they had harvested last summer. Other days, they said almost nothing. They simply held hands and breathed together, letting the quiet wrap around them like another blanket. The seasons kept turning in their gentle, endless rhythm. Winter brought the deepest sleeps. Snow piled high against the windows, creating a soft white wall that muffled the world. The fire burned steadily in the hearth. They would stay in bed until late morning, then move to the big armchair by the window with extra blankets. Elias would read a few pages at a time, his voice low and calm. Amora would listen, her head on his shoulder, eyes half closed. Then they would nap again, long, luxurious naps that lasted hours. Spring arrived with soft rain and new green shoots. They spent more time on the porch, wrapped in lighter shawls, listening to the rain on the roof. The garden woke up slowly. They planted a few new flowers but mostly just watched the old ones return. Afternoons were for sitting in the rocking chairs, feeling the warm sun on their skin. Nights were open windows and the sound of gentle rain, lulling them into even deeper rest. Summer was hammock season once more. They rocked slowly between the two old trees, the fabric creaking in a steady rhythm. The leaves above them filtered the sunlight into moving patterns of gold and green. Bees hummed in the lavender. Occasionally, a butterfly would land on the edge of the hammock. They fell asleep there almost every afternoon, waking only when the sun had moved and the air had cooled. Evenings brought fireflies again, thousands of them drifting like slow stars across the meadow. They watched them for hours before going inside to bed. Autumn returned with golden light and falling leaves. They sat on the porch swing as leaves drifted down around them. The air smelled of ripe apples and wood smoke. They collected the prettiest leaves and placed them in a big book on the coffee table. Evenings by the fire grew longer. The crackling logs and the smell of spiced cider became part of their nightly ritual. Sleep came wrapped in the scent of autumn and the warmth of the quilt. Year after year, this gentle cycle repeated. Their bodies grew frailer, but their peace grew deeper. Neighbors from the valley came up the hill more often now to help with small tasks, bringing fresh bread, splitting firewood, or simply sitting with them on the porch for company. Everyone who visited felt the same thing, a deep calm that seemed to radiate from the house itself. Elias and Amora spent most of their time in bed now. Not from sickness, but from choice. They had earned this rest. They would lie there for hours, sometimes talking in whispers, sometimes just listening to each other breathe. The bed had become a boat floating on a sea of time, slow, steady, and safe. On clear nights, they could see the stars through the window. Elias would point out the same constellations he had once navigated by during his adventures. But now they were just beautiful lights, far away and harmless. Amora would smile and squeeze his hand. One quiet winter night, many years into their long, peaceful life, they lay together under the heavy quilt. The fire had burned low to glowing embers. Snow fell softly outside. The house was completely silent except for their breathing. Elias turned his head slightly and whispered, his voice barely audible, "Amora, I think we finally reached the end of the long road." She smiled in the dark, her eyes still closed, and it was the most beautiful road of all. They held hands tightly. Sleep came over them like a warm tide, slow, deep, and complete. No thoughts. No memories of danger. Only peace. Outside, the oak tree stood tall and still, guarding the 7 shards buried beneath its roots. The valley lay quiet under snow. The stars kept their ancient watch. And somewhere beyond the veil of the world, in the place where legends rest, the eternal serpent coiled gently and whispered across the sands, the greatest adventure was always the one that ended in rest. They had found it. They had lived it. They were home. The snow kept falling softly outside the window for many more days. Elias and Amora remained in their warm bed, wrapped in the heavy quilt, hands loosely holding each other. The fire in the hearth had burned down to gentle red embers that cast a faint, comforting glow across the room. Neither of them felt any hurry to rise. Mornings blended slowly into afternoons. Elias would make tea when he felt ready, bringing 2 steaming mugs back to bed. They drank them in silence, watching the snowflakes drift past the glass. Sometimes, Amora would point out a particularly beautiful pattern the frost had made on the window. Elias would nod and smile. Words were rare and soft now. The house held them in perfect safety. The wooden beams creaked occasionally, like an old friend sighing contentedly. Outside, the world was hushed under its white blanket. Inside, time moved at the slowest, kindest pace imaginable. When the snow finally began to thin, spring arrived in tiny steps. First came the dripping from the roof. Then small patches of ground appeared in the garden. Then the first green shoots pushed through the earth. Elias and Amora started spending short periods on the porch each day, wrapped in light shawls, breathing the fresh, damp air. They spoke very little. They simply sat together, feeling the sun grow warmer on their skin week by week. The garden woke up gradually. They did not plant much new this year, just a few lavender bushes and some herbs. Mostly, they watched the old plants return, smiling when the sunflowers began reaching toward the sky again. Afternoons were spent in the rocking chairs, eyes half closed, listening to birds rebuilding their nests in the eaves. Summer returned with its warm embrace. The hammock between the 2 old trees became their favorite place once more. They would lie there for hours each day, the fabric swaying in the gentle breeze. Leaves above them created moving patterns of light and shadow across their faces. Bees hummed lazily in the lavender. Butterflies drifted by. Elias and Amora took turns dozing, waking only to sip cool water or listen to the distant sound of the stream at the bottom of the hill. Evenings brought fireflies again. Thousands of tiny lights rose from the meadow, dancing slowly in the warm air. They watched them from the porch swing until late, then moved inside to the big bed with the windows wide open. The night air carried the scent of honeysuckle and warm grass. Crickets sang their steady song. Sleep came deep and long, wrapping around them like a soft, endless blanket. Autumn followed in its golden quiet. Leaves turned red, orange, and yellow, then began to fall in soft showers. Elias and Amora sat on the porch swing for long periods, watching the leaves drift down around them. They collected a few of the brightest ones and placed them between the pages of their favorite books. The air smelled of ripe apples and distant wood smoke. Evenings by the fireplace grew longer. The crackling logs and the smell of spiced cider became part of the daily rhythm. They slept more as the days shortened. The bed felt especially warm and welcoming. They would lie there listening to the wind moving through the dry leaves outside, sinking into rest so complete that hours passed like minutes. Winter returned, wrapping the hill in white once again. Snow fell gently for days. The house became a warm cocoon. They stayed in bed longer each morning. Tea was brought. Books were read in low voices. Long naps filled the afternoons. The silence outside was absolute. Inside, the fire burned steadily, and their breathing stayed slow and peaceful. This beautiful, repeating cycle of seasons continued year after year. Spring gentle planting and soft rain. Summer long hammock days and firefly nights. Autumn golden leaves and crackling fires. Winter deep snow and even deeper sleep. Their hair remained pure white. Their steps were very slow when they walked the garden paths. They needed more help from kind neighbors who came up the hill with food and firewood. But their peace only grew deeper with every passing season. They spent most of their time in the big wooden bed now. It had become the heart of their home. They would lie there for hours, sometimes talking in whispers about small things, the color of the sky that day, the way the oak tree looked in the morning light, how sweet the tea tasted. Other times, they simply held hands and breathed together, perfectly content in the quiet. The buried shards beneath the oak tree continued to send up a constant, gentle feeling of calm through the roots of the house. Everything felt safe. Everything felt right. On warm summer nights, they still occasionally slept in the hammock, waking to dew and birdsong. On cold winter nights, they stayed curled together under many quilts, listening to the snow fall and the house creak softly. Decades continued to pass in this unhurried, beautiful way. The garden grew lush and wild. The oak tree grew even taller. The house settled a little more into the hill, becoming more a part of the land than ever before. Elias and Amora remained side by side through every season, every quiet day, every long and peaceful night. Their love had become as steady and deep as the valley below. They needed nothing else. They wanted nothing else. They had found the true eternal rest. And they lived within it, day after gentle day, year after peaceful year. Spring arrived again with its soft rains and tender green shoots. Elias and Amora spent many quiet mornings on the porch, wrapped in light blankets, listening to the rain tap gently on the roof and the wooden awning. The sound was constant and soothing, like a lullaby that never ended. They watched the garden slowly wake up, the lavender bushes sending up new purple spikes, the sunflowers stretching taller each week, tiny tomato plants unfolding their leaves in the warm soil. They did very little actual gardening now. Mostly, they sat and observed. Occasionally, one of them would point out a new flower or a bird building a nest, and the other would smile and nod. Their words were few and spoken softly, almost like whispers carried on the breeze. Afternoons were for the rocking chairs or the big armchair by the window. Elias might read a few pages from an old book, his voice low and calm, while Amora listened with her eyes half closed. Then they would both drift into long, peaceful naps. The house stayed cool and shaded, the gentle rain outside creating a perfect background rhythm for sleep. As the days grew warmer, summer unfolded in its full, lazy glory. The hammock between the two ancient oak trees became their main resting place again. They would lie there for hours every day, the fabric swaying ever so slowly in the warm breeze. Sunlight filtered through the leaves above, creating moving patterns of gold and green across their faces and hands. The air smelled of warm grass, lavender, and ripe fruit from the garden. Bees hummed in long, drowsy circles around the flowers. Butterflies drifted past without hurry. Sometimes a gentle wind would rustle the leaves for a long while, then everything would fall quiet again except for their slow breathing. They fell asleep in the hammock almost every afternoon, waking only when the sun had moved lower and the air had begun to cool. Then they would move to the porch swing and watch the fireflies rise as evening arrived. The fireflies were especially beautiful that year, thousands of tiny golden lights floating and blinking across the meadow and around the house. Elias and Amora would sit on the swing for hours, holding hands, saying nothing, simply watching the living stars dance in the warm night air. When they finally went inside, the windows stayed wide open so the night breeze and the cricket songs could fill the bedroom. They slept deeply with the scent of honeysuckle drifting over them. The bed felt like a safe boat floating on a calm, endless sea. No thoughts of the past adventures disturbed them anymore. Only the present moment, warm, quiet, and perfect. Autumn came with its golden light and falling leaves. The garden slowed down. The leaves on the oak trees turned brilliant shades of red, orange, and yellow, then began drifting down in soft showers whenever the wind blew. Elias and Amora sat on the porch swing for long stretches, watching the leaves fall around them like nature's own gentle confetti. They collected a few of the brightest ones and pressed them carefully between the pages of their favorite books on the coffee table. Evenings by the fireplace grew longer and more comforting. Elias would build the fire slowly, arranging each log with care so it would burn steadily through the night. The crackling sounds mixed with the whisper of the wind outside. They drank warm spiced cider and sat together on the rug or in the big armchair, wrapped in the same old blanket they had used for decades. Sleep in autumn felt especially rich. The cooler air made the heavy quilt feel like the warmest embrace. They would lie in bed listening to the dry leaves rustling outside and the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance, then sink into hours of deep, uninterrupted rest. Winter returned once more, blanketing the hill in soft white. Snow fell for many days, covering the roof, the garden, and the valley below in a thick, peaceful layer. The world outside grew wonderfully quiet. Inside, the fire burned steadily from morning until night. Elias and Amora stayed in bed longer each day, drinking endless cups of hot tea with honey, reading a few pages at a time, and taking long, healing naps. The snow created a cocoon of silence around the house. No outside noise could reach them. Only the gentle creak of the wooden beams and the soft hiss of snow against the windows. They slept more than ever during these months, long, deep sleeps that left them feeling rested and light even as their bodies grew older. The cycle continued beautifully, year after year. Each spring brought new green life and soft rain. Each summer brought warm hammock days and dancing fireflies. Each autumn brought golden leaves and crackling fires. Each winter brought deep snow and even deeper sleep. Elias and Amora moved through the seasons with increasing slowness and peace. Their hair stayed pure white. Their steps were careful and short when they walked the garden paths. Kind neighbors continued to visit, bringing fresh bread, splitting firewood, and sitting quietly on the porch for company. Everyone who came up the hill left feeling calmer, as though the house itself breathed out tranquility. Most of their time was now spent in the big wooden bed or on the porch. They needed little else. They wanted little else. Their days consisted of gentle routines, tea in the morning, quiet observation of the garden, long naps, simple meals, evenings by the fire or on the swing, and nights of profound, healing sleep. The buried shards beneath the old oak tree continued to radiate a constant, invisible warmth through the roots, keeping the entire home filled with deep calm. On warm nights, they still sometimes slept outside in the hammock, waking to dew on their blankets and birds singing in the trees. On cold nights, they curled together under many layers of quilts, listening to the house settle and the wind move softly through the valley. Decade after decade, the gentle rhythm continued. The garden grew a little wilder and more beautiful each year. The oak tree grew taller and stronger. The house settled deeper into the hill, becoming more a part of the landscape than ever before. Elias and Amora remained side by side through it all, two souls who had once raced across the world and now found everything they had ever searched for in these quiet, repeating, peaceful days and long, restful nights. They had truly found the eternal rest. And they lived within it, season after season, breath after gentle breath.